So I'm going to pick up the discussion that's been going on here about pi, and this is a response, I guess in some way, to Fred's recent video on pi and objective versus relative morality, which was a response to a video that I shot on does pi have an absolute value. I want to say a couple things about that. First off, I do think this is a fascinating question. I think it's a very old question. I think there are different ways to come into a response to why it seems like this sort of offers a problem. One would be, and I'm going to put a link there to this is from READ Bateson. It's the difference between number and quantity, and also Gestalt, how Gestalt, I guess, for him maybe mediates between those. But here's a little bit, and this is, I think, partly in the transition from arithmetic to geometry, or from geometry to arithmetic, I guess, right? I mean, you have every circle out there, there is a constant ratio of the diameter to the circumference, right? I mean, you say radius, well, then you're going to have to double it, but you have the circumference, and it's every circle that you look at somehow, the particular circle, it has pi, and it's sort of interesting to contemplate, sort of playfully, that the reason that pi has a non-repeating decimal is because it has to apply to every circle, meaning no circle in particular, and to that extent, it would have to still not be done. I mean, if you just sort of think of just like the logic of it is kind of interesting, which is different than, I think, than a number. Now, here, this is Bateson. This is from a 1978 article that was published in Coevolution Quarterly. He says, numbers are the product of counting. Quantities are the product of measurement. This means that numbers can conceivably be accurate because there is a discontinuity between each integer and the next. Between 2 and 3 there is a jump. In the case of quantity, there is no such jump, and because the jump is missing in the world of quantity, it is impossible for any quantity to be exact. You can have exactly 3 tomatoes. You can never have exactly 3 gallons of water. Always quantity is approximate. And I'm sure that this is very controversial. Many people, he talks in this lecture, he talks about how people dogmatically react against this. He goes on and he's talking about it too in the biological world of, does nature simply use number? Does it use quantity? Does it use Gestalt? He goes on and he gives this very fascinating example of a flower and the process that controls the petals or the stamens or the sepals. I think he's suggesting that, in some way we introduce number where there is a kind of ongoing ratio of quantity and perhaps even Gestalt, but this interesting thing that we do with numbers are somewhat fascinating. He sort of finishes off this essay. He says the distinction between numbers and quantities is, I believe, non-trivial and shown to be so by the anatomy of the rose with its 5 petals and its many stamens. And this, again, this sort of hypothesis of 5 versus many, again, is sort of very interesting. I think Fred's alignment with what could be called the deterministic non-periodic flow of pi. The fact that it is an absolute value that is deterministic and a constant, despite the fact that in some way we could chase it down forever and never find out its, quotes, ultimate value. Its ultimate value is a regulative ideal that we don't really need to understand it in an ultimate way, because what we really need is a particular way for the particular cases. See, fortunately, we don't ever have to face the world in the ultimate. We always have to face the world in the particular, and so the sort of ultimate that it is, I think, is maybe a good way of illustrating the importance of thought experiments and thought pumps and ideals. I mean, I really like the videos that Fred had shot back a couple weeks ago, where he was suggesting something like language in particular, and then language in general. I think to have those sort of notions of what something is in general, can we talk about basic principles of ethical absolutes? I think we can. I mean, I think, for example, one would be attunement to hypocrisy. To what extent is, I mean, hypocrisy or fighting against hypocrisy, trying to make sure that we don't become hypocrites? Isn't that almost like a meta value? I mean, there's some sorts of values where we say do this, don't do that, but hypocrisy seems to be like a meta value that we can all just agree upon. Or you say, well, no, I want to be flexible, but even there, don't be hypocritical. I mean, see, hypocritical seems to be, I think, something that's very robust. In the same way that self-discipline, I guess I would want to suggest that not only do I think that don't be hypocritical could be a kind of meta ethic that's a universal and a constant, but that's still open for niggle-figgling about what am I not being hypocritical about. But it's the same way about self-discipline. I think self-discipline is, it's arguably always a good. Now, again, it depends upon what the morals that the person has that they're, upholding with diligence and or vigilance. I'd want to be somewhat careful there. But it does seem to be the case that there are some kinds of values that are more of the shape and form in general, and then there are some kinds of values that are more about the application. I mean, it's sort of like, when I think of Wittgenstein's line of courage is always original.